And we're live.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the Mo Data, Mo Problems podcast. Today we have Crystal, Georgia, Jose, and myself, and we are going to explore the book, The Costs of Connection by Nick Coldry and Ulysses Mejas. They're both professors in communication. So let's get started.
Cool. So I guess we're just going to jump right in and we're all going to figure this out together. But our first question really is, why is big data a big problem? So we've all been in this comm class this whole semester and we've all been thinking about things. But like this book, hey, here it is. We made a lot of notes in it as we were reading it. And so, you know, my takeaway, big data is a big problem because it's everywhere, right? It's not just social media, it's the plants that we're growing, and it's the things that are around our house, and everything's just trying to quantify our lives. And in the process of quantifying our lives, there's also like these other things that are going on where our freedoms and our senses of self are being eroded in order to make a capitalistic mode of production on this data. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Crystal. One big point is that we're not even really consenting to this surveillance, this big data. So our free will and our environment is being manipulated, and we aren't aware of it. And I think that's the really scary thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. There's a lot of focus right now on like social media algorithms or like YouTube algorithms that feed you stuff. And so people think that like, that's the extent of it. But like what Crystal was saying with, knowing cameras, watching our eyes, where we shop, what products we're buying, cell phone companies tracking our locations. It's everywhere. And not only do we not necessarily understand it or not know when it's happening, or we like click yes to the terms of service because we really have no choice. We don't know whose hands it's in and what's their use for it. So to me, it's not necessarily that big data is inherently bad. It's bad when it's in the wrong hands and we don't even know, and we don't have any power to question it and regulate it and say, hey, how is this helping society versus just getting a few people richer?
Yeah, I agree with Georgia on that one. The big data, the collection itself is a black box. So we can't really peer into it without having to go through a lot of hoops and a lot of policies. And that's what makes it scary because as the others have said, we don't exactly know what's happening behind the scenes, how they're collecting it, where they're collecting it, and where the points are that big data is taking our data from. So it's kind of hard to protect against it right now.
Yeah, and we read in the book, these companies are caching, I don't know if I said that right, but data that they haven't even decided how they're going to use it yet. They're just collecting it, hoarding it for later, just because they can.
Right. I can make money off of this, maybe.
Somehow, yeah. So we're just going to gather everything, and what we're talking about here is people's whole lives, like their hobbies, their relationships, their movements, their like I was thinking about how that line that people say, there's these key players are starting to know more about us than we know ourselves.
Right. And that's a really great segue to like our next really big question about this book. So the authors, you know, write about data colonialism. Their entire book is arguing that a way for us to think about why big data is a big problem is through the lens of colonialism. So, you know, it's really important for us to think about then, like, what is historical colonialism, and is that an appropriate frame for thinking about modern day datafication, social quantification, and so on? Who wants to take that? Oops.
Well, I'd like to say that I was nervous. I think we were all a little nervous about the colonialism use in the beginning. Like, where are they going with this? And are they going to do it in a respectful way? But I do think that, you know, if you want to understand big data, you do need to understand, you know, what is capitalism and the history of colonialism and imperialism. Like, it's really important to have a basic understanding of that. And the book did a really good job they defined it maybe a little too often. It was like they had a lot of definitions of what is colonialism, what is data colonialism, and why is that, you know. So I think they did a good job of making their point. But as far as what is colonialism, I would have to look at my notes.
Yeah, first couple of chapters, we were all definitely wondering whether the colonialism frame was actually going to be appropriate. And they do a good job. They say, you know, historically, colonialism has been appropriation of resources, evolution of highly unequal social and economic relations, unequal global distributions, and then the spread of ideologies that makes this colonialism acceptable. And all of those things are totally applicable to data and big data. And I think where these authors were successful with their colonialism frame is, like, it's so in your face that I think people who aren't really aware that this is a huge problem, which was me, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a huge problem. Like, this is exactly what has happened historically.
Right. There's not a whole lot of people out there who are any sense of nice who could argue that historical colonialism was anything other than barbaric and appropriative and left a swath of destruction on the planet's surface, right? And so, you know, they're really trying to make that connection of data's doing the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they give a lot of examples about how the global South and minoritized and marginalized communities suffer the most under this data colonialism regime, which fits with historical colonialism.
Yeah, the book really does a good job of showing the examples in which historical colonialism crosswalks with data colonialism, where instead of land masses being appropriated and like real resources, the ones being appropriated right now is everything to know about you as a person, and using that as their resource to subjugate us into, I would say, consuming more of their product, because they're training us to rely more on those instead of others or something else.
And I just want to put another huge asterisk on this slide, because we spent a lot of time with this text, and so it might seem like we're like drinking the Kool-Aid, but we struggled for, I don't know, maybe like the first 3 book club sessions that we had. We were like, is this really, you know, comparable to the atrocities of colonialism? And I think it took us a little while to look at it structurally and actually be like, okay, you know, like this is appropriate.
Yeah, I had an aha moment Yeah, I think I shared with you guys about my indigenous politics class that I was taking at the same time, that where we were discussing historical colonialism a lot. And one of the points they made about colonialism is that it is still happening. So a lot of times I think
Exactly.
we think that this was historical, and we think of it as armies invading with force and violence and all of that. But in class they often brought up, they showed how it's like a more civilized version of colonialism that still is taking place around the globe, but it still is violent because it's a slow death for people. It's poverty, it's health. It has, it dispossesses people of land, of freedom, so it has this degradation. So I feel like that's where they had a really strong argument of saying this isn't a new form of colonialism. This is the same old thing, just doing it in like the cloud empire, right? So there's the empire, and it happens in the cloud. So then people might say, well, that's not so bad, because it's like invisible and it's digital, so there's no guns and there's no slavery or anything. But as Cameron said, as I really sat with this as the weeks went by, I was like, this is still, if it affects your health, your income, your freedom to move, your privacy, your thoughts, like it is just as bad, because it's consuming all life, and it's not just individual, it's our collective freedom and agency and quality of life.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, hey, I don't know how the rest of you feel, but like, let's do an anti-2020 theme where we tell you how the world is horrible, and now let's maybe talk about what the authors think about what are the solutions for all this. Is there a way for us to stop this in its tracks, to change the direction of things? What are actions that we can do to actually make it better? Solidly anti-2020.
good
Yeah.
segue.
Yep. So for me, the author really did a good job of using this book to spread the awareness of data colonialism and why it's really bad and why we should start to put a stop to it, through all those examples and the crosswalks between historical colonialism and then data colonialism and big data appropriations of our own data. And I think that's a really important thing, since, as Georgia said, this colonialism is still happening. So I think the very first thing we need to do is spread awareness that it is actually happening, because I think a lot of people, they're not really privy to what's happening, because, like I said earlier, the big data companies try to make all their operations a black box so that we don't see into it.
Yeah, like the Netflix show, The Social Dilemma, only came out a couple of months before we, recorded this. This book was only written in 2019. It came out in August of 2019. Scholars have been bemoaning this for a long time, right? But like, when is the public's going to start dealing with it, and what kind of actions can the publics do, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's kind of like they don't want us necessarily to delete everything and just fall off the grid, because that doesn't really help anything. One of the solutions they proposed is the way that we think about how we use data. So they teach students and kids, how to unplug and how to interact with media differently. But how could we reconceptualize our relationship with media? Like, we can't even think of a vision of a future where humans use technology and it's helpful to us, but we are able to draw lines. That's so foreign to us.
Right.
Yeah, so part of it is reimagining that social order that we talked about in that's part of the colonialism framework.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
authors
and
call
that's
that
the hardest part.
yeah, the authors call that the seamfulness, right? Like we like to think about it's a seamless integration of our laptops and our phones and our smart televisions and stuff. But the author's like, nah, man, we have to have seams where things stop and like it doesn't just integrate naturally. There's nothing natural about it. Those seams have to be created or taken apart.
And one of those themes could be regulation. And as I did my undergrad in poli-sci, so I'm big on legislation and, you know, organizing and power of the people. And I think so the first start is like citizens, you know, need to be educated on this, because I think, like Cameron was saying, like the media literacy, this is kind of a new phenomenon for people, so it's like hard to even wrap your head around it. But the real life practical examples are a perfect way to kind of start to understand, and then you start to look around. It's kind of like what we did in the beginning of class with the terms of service, and like really like taking a hard look at how embedded some of our technology is. And then we need to educate our legislators and push them for effective regulations. And there is, you know, we are starting to see in Congress, you know, they're pulling in, you know, like Zuckerberg and starting to have questions. So we're starting to see that, and we really need that to increase, because we can't just rely, I think 2020 has taught us, we can't just rely on the good faith of the system or the goodwill of very rich and powerful people. They do not have our best interests at heart. And so we have to hold them accountable. There's just no way around it. And like the book said, this is an inconvenient problem. This is not an easy problem with easy solutions. But what I would like to say is, one thing I caught at the very end was, don't believe the hype that the data colonizers are selling us, that this is inevitable and that it's too big and too scary and too hard. So you just go and play with your phones and we'll handle the data because we're like special. It's not that mysterious. I think that's what this book actually shows, is like, you can learn this, you can understand this, and then the smoke and mirrors are gone, and we can have boundaries and use this data for ourselves as well, for our own, you know, the betterment of humanity versus just for profit of a few.
Yeah, so like it's really important for us to like really change the way that we think about data, the way that things are connected, that there are one of the things the authors say is pluralism and not universalism. Everything doesn't have to connect. Everything doesn't have to be towards the same goals. There can be, they really emphasize the locality, the localness of things, right? So like, we don't have to have everything, and local can be like a small community, can be a bigger community, right? It's like the smart city concept, they don't talk about it specifically, but I think they would be pretty against the smart city because there's this whole concept of everything's just connected, but does it really need to be? Like, how does that really improve life? But who's at what expense, right? So there are solutions, but you know, I think we also had some criticisms, right? Do we want to talk about that now? Yeah. So like, I don't know, you know, we've all kind of talked about it as we've been going through, like we were really wary of the wagoniness of the whole colonization framework, right? Like that has become the epistemological and analytical tool of academia in the past couple of years. Is it okay? Well, in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no, right? So I think that was one of our biggest criticisms, was how'd they do with this, and did they do it well? They integrated a lot of like non-Western voices in their argument, in the creation of their argument, but did they do it enough? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we thought they could do a better job of. It's almost like these authors were so focused on defending their framework theoretically that they neglected to incorporate their thoughts in a larger dialogue, right? There are other authors that are talking about data as an issue. But you know, that could be a pro and that could be a con, because like we said earlier, this in your face colonialism framework, maybe these authors' purpose was more so the I hate to say it, but the shock value, right? The reader can say like, oh wow, this really is a problem, as opposed to, oh, this is a problem and we should look at, you know, the entire discourse.
Yeah, I wanted to see a little bit more of some Indigenous scholars who are experts in colonialism maybe be pulled into the conversation, like if they had interviewed or just cited their work a little bit to see, because I know that there are scholars working on this. Yeah, and I don't know, but I imagine just based on the other class I was taking that maybe someone might say that, you know, the colonialism label is supposed to be about like the erasure and the dispossession of Indigenous people specifically. So they might feel that this is overreaching, possibly, because it's not like these aren't data. Colonialism goes after all humans, not just specific groups. So I would imagine that might be the criticism, potential criticism.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jose.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought that the book was unbalanced a bit, or actually it's pretty unbalanced towards the bad, and the author only took about, I would say, a chapter to discuss what we could do.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like he could have expanded more, or the authors could have expanded more on the solutions part, and also give us some more other research, just so that we could have more knowledge of what we have to do, instead of just saying that, oh, we have to do all this in conjunction so that we could start to fight data colonialism.
I totally agree. And I think it also has to do with hope, because you were like, yeah, give us the knowledge, but also give us a little hope, because if you're going to spend 90% of the book with, I mean, it's horrifying. And then you're like, well, you know, like maybe here's some things we could do. It's like, oh no, this is bad.
Yeah, that was the hard part. And the other thing that I kind of felt was weak in the book was quite a few of their examples to me were not necessarily the scariest. And then, so like in the news, you can find even more horrifying examples of this, like that New York Times article about Planeteer, and like, you know, some of the policing techniques. And so it's like part of me wanted them to have even scarier examples, but then I'm like, could I even handle it in one book? It's like it's like doom and gloom. Right. It was rough.
Yeah, so, you know, some of the other like criticisms that we had, right, was that, you know, their solutions were kind of wishy-washy, right? Like, we need collective action and we need to encourage ways to think about things. Like, they don't offer enough pointed, specific things, other than perhaps saying that like the US needs to adopt something like the European Union's version of the GDPR. Like California has something like that, and California is like Silicon Valley hub, but like their examples are pie in the sky, big structural issues kind of thing, but like, can this be attacked at a big structural level, or do we need like micro and meso level stuff too? So
Right.
So hey, I don't know how the rest of y'all feel, but should anybody else read this book?
Oh yeah, and huge shout out to Cami Yokota for recommending this book to the class, because I think all four of us really, really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Yeah, you know, we're all stretched for time. There's a whole lot on everybody's plate right now. Do you need to read the entire book? Well, it depends on what else you've read, right? If nothing else, at least read the last chapter, the chapter 6. They summarize their arguments. They offer the solutions. So you get the great without all of the horrible, but you still understand like what the whole frame of everything is. So.
Yeah, I agree
highly
with.
recommend. Sorry, Jose. Go for it.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I'm like big cheerleader for this book. I highly recommend it. I think if I were a teacher in communications, I might make it required unless I found something better. Just because, like what I was saying in our rehearsal practice run, if you're in communications, you need to understand this is like the infrastructure that's guiding everything, and when they talk about everything being connected, everything is communicating. You know, the system is communicating and we're communicating with it, and then it's communicating with us whether we know it or not, you know, whether we're aware or not. So if you're going to be working in this field, you've got to have an understanding of this, how data works, the mechanics of it, who the key players are, who the owners are. There was that word, oh geez, here I go. Monopsony or
Monopsony?
Monopsony. I tried to say this a bunch of times and I couldn't get it. That's something that's a term I think people should know when it comes to data, and basically like, you know, just a few companies owning all this data and collecting it for no reason, and just so that they can use it later on. So I think this book is basically about ethics and morals and values and humanity and freedom and like big important ideas. So I definitely recommend it, especially if you're into political communications or, you know, social justice issues or public health communications. So pretty much, I mean, probably every field, but those are the ones that come to mind for me. So yes, read it. And the beginning and the end, like the middle, you can kind of skim.
Yeah, me too. I definitely enjoyed reading this book. Not really enjoyed because of the bad things that were being mentioned in the book, but I enjoyed the fact that the book really does a good job of whetting my senses to the idea of what they're doing behind the scenes in terms of data colonialism. And if you're interested in getting started and looking at data privacy and what's currently happening, then this is a really good book to get started with, because it's not that long and it gives you like in your face what you need to know about what's happening.
Yeah, I'm a very similar camp. Like 100%, I think that you should read this book, but I also, kind of to Crystal's point, I haven't read a lot of books about data surveillance. So if you're very knowledgeable about it, then maybe you just want to read about the framework. But for me, this book sort of, I don't want to be dramatic and say changed my life, but I'm going to be dramatic and say changed my life, because I like went through my phone and, you know, I started conversations with people in my family about data and capitalism and, you know, just how things are and what we should do. And I think it left me hungry for more. So that was really good for me. And I'm excited to continue learning. So I would recommend it, even though it is a little dreadful at times. So get yourself a good book club so that you can be depressed together.
Great. Right. And so we don't want to keep everybody too much longer. So, you know, we talked about like, should you read this book? And a lot of it depends on like what you've read before. So, you know, hey, here's some other things. Like if any of this interests you, you might think about reading this. We read a lot of this in our COM633 class this semester. You know, other things that are out there that kind of talk about similar issues. They all kind of feed into each other in like this really horrible like vortex kind of way. But you know, there's other resources out there that talk about it from different sorts of perspectives. And yeah, it's really just coming into it with an open mind and, you know, figuring out where you stand and what your individual actions are.
You guys mind if I add something I forgot to add earlier?
If you can. I don't know if it'll show up while we're in our live view of it.
Oh no, I'm just gonna read from my notes.
Oh yeah.
So this was something that touched me like emotionally when I was reading this book, and I feel like they kind of like threw it in, and this is like a thread I want to go back and follow up on. So I think if people are interested in conservation or environmental activism, this is also an important book because they had this section, I think it was in chapter 1 or 2. Sorry, I don't have it, but it was one of those, and they have these big problems. And so this is kind of my paraphrase of the big problems. So they identified, so this is in terms of the capitalism argument. So we talked a lot about the colonialization, but this is addressing this. So as people get poorer and income inequality grows, they can't buy as many things. So capitalism now needs a new way to make money. So capitalism is looking at social quantification as profit, which to me is super sad, right? It's like, how can we make money off of these poor people who can't even afford to buy things anymore? And the second problem is as technology gets cheaper, so like, you know, computers and stuff are cheaper, there's a lower profit margin. So again, capitalism's like, how can I make money? Oh, I know, off of humans. And not just their work, but their social lives, their you know. And so the final, like, to me, this was the nail in the coffin, is as natural resources are depleted and the planet is destroyed, this is my words, capitalism needs a new green resource in the form of social quantification. And then this is a direct quote: data colonialism completes the process of appropriating life that the appropriation of nature started. So my take is on this is that this is unsustainable. This is a very short-term profit. This can't go on much longer. Like, if there's no natural resources, then there's no humans to exploit, and there's no capitalism, but there's also just like nothing. So to me, this is, I want to urge people not to get caught up in like, this is the next way to make money, or this is like, because it just doesn't, ultimately it doesn't make sense. I think data needs to be used to help save the planet versus extract more money out of people. That's my soapbox.
It's a good box. All right, so thanks everybody for listening. This has been Crystal and Cameron and Georgia and Jose, and we are signing off.
Bye.
One podcast wonder.